3, 2.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. We got a number of members. We got a number of special guests from across the country, all about important issues. This issue is so important, especially to the people across this country, because what is happening out there, what the government is doing to make the price of gasoline higher, the energy higher, and causing just conflict in these families and the struggles. We've got so many members. We've got people even behind us as well, but we're going to get everybody to the table. But we've got some good news on the way, too. A number of you have been working to find solutions. I want to highlight Garrett Graves for leading our Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force, and so many of you have been a part of it as we've been going across the country to roll out other solutions to make America stronger from that aspect. We've got Let America Build, and I think across the country people would support that. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. You want to see America build. You'd like to see gasoline a little lower prices and all. But we've got a lot of great people to have discussions today. I can't thank you all enough for being a part of it, these experts and others, but we are really facing an energy crisis in America, and it doesn't have to be that way. God has blessed America. We could be energy independent. And when you think about that, just in the short time period of what the government has done in this new administration, record high gas prices. But that leads to inflation upon everything, that you have to move the products and ever. But what it also leads to is the kitchen table. You know, Walmart has this internal study. It's called the white bread study. And what it is they take sales of everything they're selling. But at that moment in time, if you want to know you're in an economic crisis, is when the white bread sales go up and the hot dog, the hamburger buns, and the whole wheat drops. Because what it's telling you is people are so price conscious, they stop buying the hamburger buns and you have them on white bread. And they're at that point to just recently put. And why are people doing it, if you want to interview? Because they're paying more for gasoline, so they have to drive less. It's taking more money out of their pockets. We've watched what this administration has done, and you've looked at the current inflation numbers that have come in. Over 9%. So if you are on a job where you get a salary, think of this, 1 month is 8.3%. So what this new administration has done by taking a crisis from energy, making the price of everything higher, creating inflation, those in America have now worked more than a month for free. Can you imagine? You just lost a month's paycheck because everything costs more. So when you think about the white bread test in Walmart, you understand why that is happening. But the good news is, especially for those out there who are listening to us, we have solutions that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can lower the price and we become energy independent. We can lower gasoline, that would lower inflation, and we could also protect our environment at the same time. I mean, I always love so many of you around the table that bring this point up, but American natural gas is 41% cleaner than Russian natural gas. And we've watched what's happened in Europe. And the one thing a lot of people understand, a military can make you strong, but dependency makes you weak. And we'll watch where Europe is today. Why in America would we ever make ourselves dependent on somebody else? Why in America would we ever want our president going to the Middle East, asking them to produce something more that we could produce in America that could create American jobs, lower the price, but also be more environmentally sound to do? And I've got to thank all the members around the table who've been a part of this and finding the solutions and rolling out Letting America Build. And I want to now turn it over to the individual who's been leading it, Garrett Graves, who's just done a tremendous job, and all of you that have been on the task force as well. I appreciate that. Garrett, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin, and want to thank all the members for being here. We have members from the state of California on the West Coast. We have folks on the Canadian border. We have folks from the nation of Texas, and just all across America here today. Just a lot of interest in this. Look, as Leader McCarthy just noted, we have some incredible challenges facing America today, whether it is the unaffordable cost to refuel your vehicle, the unaffordable cost to pay your electricity bill. You can look at what's happening with traffic problems across America. You have cities in the United States right now where people waste 80 hours a year sitting in traffic, according to a recent analysis. And so, look, I go on and on, whether it's the resilience of communities, protecting them from floods, repetitive floods in some cases, people living in coastal communities being protected from coastal storms, forest fires. All of these things are crises, yet what we're watching happen right now is we're watching more and more bureaucratic red tape that is further slowing or delaying solutions. Can you imagine for just a minute if the D-Day invasion, if they said, hold on, we have to do an environmental analysis, we have to get a permit from the Corps of Engineers for this? No, we went in and did what needed to be done. And it's a similar situation here. We have crisis facing this country. We have got to be aggressive about solutions. One of the biggest issues that we hear is the National Environmental Policy Act. This act that is decades and decades old. When it was first enacted, it took months to get through and actually do an analysis to determine the environmental impacts or the environmental benefits of a project. Today, we're seeing an average of 5 years, 7 years for a road project, in some cases in excess of a decade. I want to remind you, this is America. We're the country that has outworked every other country. We've got greater innovation. We're incredibly efficient here, but we're imposing delays. We're imposing bureaucracy on ourselves. I'll tell you something else. The majority of infrastructure projects carried out across America today don't go through a federal permitting process and don't go through the National Environmental Policy Act. You know why? Because they're funded with private dollars. You know what else doesn't go through that? Projects in other countries. We've got other countries that are blowing us away in terms of how quickly they can deliver solutions. So what we're doing today is we're releasing a component of our Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force that's called Let America Build. Let America build. Take the handcuffs off. Let us go out there and implement solutions for energy, for infrastructure, and other challenges that are facing America today. It's focused on cutting through the red tape, staying focused on what regulatory objectives are. Let's think about environmental outcomes and other things without becoming fodder for litigation, without becoming an employment program for bureaucrats and others. We've got some great legislation that we're going to be highlighting today by Congressman Westerman and others that are experts in this field that are going to allow us to efficiently develop solutions or implement solutions to our energy crisis, to our traffic and transportation crisis, to our supply chain and logistics crisis in America, and other challenges that we're facing. So I want to thank again everybody for being here today, and I want to turn it over to Congresswoman Stephanie Bice from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I hail from a state that is top 5 in oil and gas production, and we know how to produce here in Oklahoma. The frustrating part for many of the folks that are producing in my great state, a couple of which are here with us today, is the fact that they are being hamstrung, whether it is pipeline permitting, whether it is pulling federal land permits or delaying those permitting processes. At the end of the day, we have the ability and have in the past been American energy independent. And to that end, we are also doing it in a clean, affordable, and efficient way. If you look at the gas production across the world, specifically in Russia, it is, as was mentioned earlier, dirtier and environmentally unfriendly in many cases. And so we need to be focusing on policies that are going to be environmentally friendly, as the friends here at the table for their companies have been doing, but also making sure that we're providing for Americans' energy resources. This is a topic that I think the administration doesn't want to discuss, because at the end of the day, they want to blame everyone else. They have blamed the oil and gas companies for price gouging. They look at every reason to not invest in energy in the country. And from my perspective, this is an area that we can lead on, we should lead on, and keeping in mind, the environment is certainly part of that. So I'm thrilled to be with all of you this afternoon and looking forward to hearing from the guests that are here at the table today.
All right, and next we're going to hear from Congressman Bruce Westerman, the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee.
Thank you, Ranking Member Graves, and to everyone who showed up today and who's watching online. And I just want, for the record, I wish the leader was still here to know that with every loaf of bread comes either one hot dog or one hamburger bun or 2 hot dog buns. You take the heels, and that's how we. You can roll it up for a hot dog or put them together for a hamburger. And as we look at this gathering today, the issue that we're going to talk about, and Garrett talked about it, we need to be a nation of builders, and we are a nation of builders. We're a nation that's always been one that can do, but we have an administration and we have folks on the left that are saying you cannot. And one way that they do that is through the regulatory process. And I can tell you, from my career, I spent 2.5 decades in an engineering firm where we did large capital projects. And I thought it was difficult dealing with regulations in that setting, but I realized after I came to Congress and found out how, when you start dealing with public lands and the federal bureaucracy, that we were really in the minor leagues back home in the work that I did. And it was extremely frustrating. But I can tell you this, that American engineers, American ingenuity, and American innovators create the cleanest, most efficient, and most effective projects in the world. I traveled around the world looking at facilities like the ones we were building here in the United States, and hands down, by following the process, we were building facilities cleaner and more efficient than anybody else. And a lot of the stuff we had to do was ridiculous and repetitive because government bureaucrats had no idea how the real world actually worked. Put that on the federal level, the way NEPA's been weaponized, the way the Endangered Species Act's been weaponized, and you have an environment that's pushing people out of America for investment. You look at the permitting process on energy. You look at forestry, an area where I'm very passionate about, and we can't even use scientific forestry to manage our public lands, and we're seeing them go up in smoke every day. Forest fires, unlike forest fires we've ever seen. And a lot of that's self-inflicted because we've allowed government bureaucrats, we've allowed zealous environmental groups that really don't care about the environment to come in and stop the management practices. And it's why I'm excited about what the task force has put together, and especially Representative Graves' Builder Act. This is something that would be great to have, that would allow us to actually be like Bob the Builder and Yes We Can, instead of like Democrats in Congress and the administration that are every day saying, America, no you can't. But I think a new day is coming, and we're going to be able to move these policies. When we talk about natural climate solutions, a lot of this fits right in with how we're good stewards of the environment, and at the same time we have a strong, healthy, safe environment and economy. So the two go hand in hand, and that's what the solutions that come out of this task force are working towards. So I'm honored to be here today and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Bruce. And since all your kids are out of college, we now know what's on your Netflix favorite list. The next person we're going to go to is Congressman Dan Newhouse from Washington State, who has been a champion on regulatory issues and just fantastic, and leading Western Caucus and other initiatives to make sure this stays in the forefront.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Graves and Westerman. And I too wish Leader McCarthy was still here, because, if you make French toast out of white bread, it makes it real fancy. That's what we used to do. But no, I'm just delighted to be part of this today, and thank you for your leadership on this important issue. And everybody that's a guest today, thank you for your involvement as well. As chairman of the Western Caucus, I have the privilege of leading almost 80 members of Congress, mostly representing rural America, and we are constantly, repeatedly working to reform our broken permitting system in this country. Every time I go home back to Central Washington State and I talk to farmers or business leaders, people are trying to accomplish things. People are trying to build something. The reaction I get from people is that the regulatory and the permitting process is too cumbersome. It takes too long. It takes too much time. It needs to be changed. And rural America, we're at the forefront of this. We truly are. We're the ones that feed people. We're the ones that produce the energy. We're the ones that are trying to manage our lands. And we can't do that under this burdensome system. And so I think we've got to let rural communities out from underneath the burden of the regulatory climate that we have. This is especially true in the energy sector. Oh my gosh, we have an unprecedented, I would call unprecedented energy crisis. And largely due to some of the decisions that have been made by this administration and the weaponizing, you've used that term a couple of times here, of the permitting process. We literally have the answer to our energy crisis underneath our feet if we would just let the energy industry do what it does best, do what it does better than anyone around the country. You know, I was going to say, the permitting process is so cumbersome. In my state, in a 20-year period in the last century, we were able to build a 1 million acre feet of water storage in 20 years, in building 5 different reservoirs. That happened between 1910 and 1930s. We've been trying to build a 6th reservoir since, and guess what? The permitting process is so cumbersome we can't. We have not been able to do so. We've got to unleash our ability to be leaders in the world and be as competitive as we possibly can. So I'm just thrilled to have all of our guests here today to be part of this discussion. We have the solutions in this country at our fingertips, and like I said, underneath our feet if we just allow the industry to move forward in a responsible way to garner that advantage that we have. So thank you very much, Ranking Member Graves.
Thank you. Thanks, Congressman Newhouse. Another very thoughtful leader on these issues is Dr. Burgess from Texas. And I want to be clear that one thing I think we all share is nobody has an objection necessarily to the goals of environmental laws and permits and regulation. It is more so the challenges with trying to comply with them and implementing them and how they have become so litigious and bureaucratic. So Dr. Burgess has legislation on this that he wants to highlight.
Thank you, Representative Graves. Thanks for including me in the Climate Task Force and in this roundtable today. HR 1616, I think you've included in the package that we're going to be considering. HR 1616 is promoting interagency coordination of review of the National Gas Pipelines Act. Basically, this streamlines the permitting process for interstate natural gas pipelines. Permian Basin is a gift to the country, gift to the economy. One of the problems that we encounter in the Permian Basin is more gas is produced than can be usefully exported. No one wants to see flaring, no one wants to see venting, but you got to get it somewhere so it can be marketed. And permitting and siting of these interstate natural gas pipelines would do so much for unlocking the potential of the Permian Basin and getting that gas out to a place where it can be utilized or liquefied, exported. And as former Energy Secretary Rick Perry used to say, it's like exporting freedom around the world. So that's what 1616 is focused on. And again, thanks so much to Garrett Graves for including that legislation in the package that we're going to be delivering to the conference.
Well, thanks for great ideas. Another great idea comes from a fantastic representative from Utah, a great leader in the House, Congressman Blake Moore. Congressman Moore, it's important to note that the regulatory just morass or bureaucracy, it doesn't just stop projects, pouring concrete or producing conventional fuels. It also affects modernization of the grid, renewable energy projects, environmental restoration projects, and I think you have legislation that sort of looks at things across the board.
Yeah, as you actually bring that up, in Utah, one of our main power supply companies is actively trying to build in renewables to their entire portfolio, and they're hampered by the regulation that is supposed to help the environment. And it's fascinating, and he was just out here speaking to a bipartisan group of people. What I'll quickly mention, as I sit next to, I'm excited to hear from some of our experts here today that are in the industry. I look at your title, Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy, and I spent about a decade in strategy consulting prior to this, and my experience from that was, other than bad policy, the most difficult thing for companies and corporations to navigate is unpredictable policy. And that's what this bill that I'm doing and many that are others are trying to do, is create an environment that allows for proper investment and operations that go on in the industry so you can do your job and not put the burden of American energy on the backs of every single American. Because that's what's happened over the last 18 months, is the burden has been shifted directly to the American consumer when it didn't reduce an ounce of emissions. Right, that's the part that we get so frustrated with. And so, again, the Promoting Energy Independence and Transparency Act is simple. We're not asking to not do the environmental review. We're asking, once you do the environmental review, you have 30 days. You have 30 days to issue the permit. We want it transparent. We want you to communicate how many ADPs that are there and what your strategy is to do that. Giving the industry an opportunity to comply and to build a plan looking out 10 years. We as politicians oftentimes are too worried about 2 years because of our 2-year cycles. And that's what we're seeing right now, is they're so focused on what's going to happen in the election system right now. But when you all are worried about what's going on with your companies for the next 10 years and how you're going to be able to provide that freedom that you talk about to the American people, these are simple, easy things. Anybody could agree with this. But we're just constantly seeing this administration and congressional Democrats continue to come up with ways to slow play and to hamper this. We're seeing it in my own district back in Utah, where they just keep slow playing it and come up with another wrinkle and another regulatory issue, and they're going to use the Forest Service for this one, or it's as clear as day that their intent is to do exactly what's happening, and that's to raise gas prices for no reason whatsoever other than to satisfy a political agenda. So, thank you.
Thanks, Blake. We have a number of, I guess what I'll call practitioners or innovators, and I mentioned earlier that one of the biggest challenges we have, or one of the greatest things about America, is that we've out-innovated so many other countries, but the regulatory obstacles or the red tape involved in complying with permits and other regulatory requirements has become so challenging that the practitioners have been unable to implement solutions. So we have a number of great innovators here today, and look forward to hearing from you all. The first one we're going to start with is Roger Martella, who's Chief Sustainability Officer with GE. So, and actually, is that going to be okay? Okay, all right, great.
Just get a little closer to you. There we go.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Graves, for including me, members of the task force. I've had the chance to work with a number of you since last on COP26, and I've been very impressed with this initiative and everything you're doing and the goals that you're setting, which we fully support. We're proud to be here on behalf of General Electric, and in short, I think we share the same goals and the notion of how can we build cleaner, and how can we build faster, and some thoughts we have on that. Just real briefly, GE's equipment produces 1/3 of the world's energy. 90% of the world's utilities use our equipment, and we're the only U.S. company that's in the gas power business, the renewable energy business, the grid business, and we're investing in the breakthrough technologies of carbon capture sequestration, hydrogen as a fuel, small modular reactors, and a lot of things that are going to promote, I think, what you're trying to achieve with energy independence, addressing climate change, and promoting jobs and good supply chains and security for the country at the same time. And what we're trying to do is two things simultaneously. We want to make our energy system more resilient. We want to make sure everyone has access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity. And we can't take that for granted. There's 800 million people in the world who don't have access. And in the US, we're seeing more threats to our system with weather events, more variability from renewables, more demand, cybersecurity. So we have vulnerabilities that we're seeing. We want to strengthen those vulnerabilities. At the same time, we want to be stronger stewards of the environment. We know conservation is very important to this task force, addressing climate change, decarbonization. How can we promote conservation, remove greenhouse gases, and make sure we're also creating a thriving economy with jobs, with innovation, energy reliability. So we have these goals in common. We want to do this simultaneously. We want to build cleaner, and we want to build faster. So we have a few principles and kind of what we're focused on and how we're approaching it. First, we think innovation and technology is the key. We've led on innovation and technology. That's how we're going to allow us to continue to succeed in these efforts and for this task force to achieve its goals. Innovation and technology, we're focused on small modular reactors, hydrogen, carbon capture sequestration, and opportunities to partner to realize that success. Making sure we're technology neutral in these approaches, that we're letting the market find the best way, the best types of energy, the best technologies to realize these goals. And I think, Congressman Moore, you hit on, I think, the number one issue. it's not the technology that's the issue, it's uncertainty. The biggest thing that's gonna, frustrate our goals to not be able to be successful here is uncertainty. These are huge investments, these are huge risks, and you just can't make the types of scale investments in breakthrough technologies, projects of this magnitude, infrastructure of this magnitude, when you don't have the certainty, when you don't know what's going to happen with permits, what the timeline for that looks like, what could happen with litigation. And that is the single biggest factor I think this task force, Congress, and the government can address if we're going to partner together to realize these successes. The relationship between companies and government is changing. I think it's turning into one of partnership. I think this task force has been a strong driver of that. We have the same goals, and we support these efforts to address the issues we've been talking about. We're seeing Canada get ahead of us on small modular reactor technologies. We're seeing the European Union, we're seeing China, we're seeing other parts of the world get ahead on breakthrough technologies like hydrogen and carbon capture sequestration. I know we want to lead just like Silicon Valley leads in technology, you want to lead in energy, and there's opportunities to do that. I had the honor last year to participate in something led by the Ascent Institute, which was a very bipartisan approach, Republicans, Democrats, thought leaders on both sides, to say how can we build cleaner faster. And we produced a report, I think similar to a lot of legislation you've been talking about, which is how can we look at the existing tools that we support, NEPA, public participation, and make sure everybody's having those protections and safeguards, but also adjusting that so that we can build these systems so we can achieve all these goals in a way that's faster and modernizes it. So we looked at a number of ideas and how you can approve things quicker, how you can take different types of projects and streamline that, have Congress, have the government do some of the legwork, set timelines, even set limits for how quickly judicial review has to happen. So I would encourage folks to look at some of those specific ideas with the Ascent Institute, and of course I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you again for including me.
Great, thank you very much. And I want to turn to Preston Gillespie, who's Chief Generation Officer with Duke Energy.
Well, thank you, and thank you for allowing me a few minutes to spend with this team today. Over a century ago, the founder of our company had the audacity to think that he could dam a major tributary in the southeastern U.S., build a lake that would produce hydropower that fundamentally transformed the region. It attracted industry, provided jobs in the region, and since that day, Duke Energy continues to fulfill the mission of serving our customers and serving our communities well. I'm the Chief Generation Officer who's accountable to our over 4 million customers for the delivery of safe, reliable, and affordable electricity. We do this across the southern part of the United States. We're in Florida, we're in the Carolinas, and we're in Indiana. Our craftsmen, engineers, and operators generate using all types of fuel sources. So if it can be a source of generation, we operate it. We operate solar, we operate batteries, we operate hydroelectric, we operate nuclear power plants, we operate gas power plants, some that Roger has provided to us. We operate coal plants. We're experimenting with hydrogen generation, we're experimenting with carbon sequestration. So it's very encouraging to me to listen to this type of conversation that says that the leaders of this nation are interested, beyond interested, are willing to take action to ensure that we can continue to meet the needs of our stakeholders, the needs of our customers, the needs of our communities as we move forward and continue to provide those very critical and essential services.
Thank you. One comment that came to mind when you two were speaking is, you talked about the volatility and how, you're basically saying, give me the rules and we'll deliver. And so what we've been doing through the task force's efforts is looking at both economically sustainable solutions, but also environmentally sustainable solutions, because that's what really transcends or penetrates these different ideologies. It allows, those solutions to stay on the table, regardless of where the ideology is of a White House or a department. But we're continuing to ensure that that's a theme in our efforts. Next, we're going to go to Jeff Fisher with Ascent Resources.
Thank you, Representative Ranking Member Graves, and it's great to be with you all today. I'm Jeff Fisher, CEO of Ascent Resources. We are an independent, privately held operator in the great state of Ohio, the largest producer there, and also one of the top producers of natural gas in the U.S. We're very proud of that. We've been part of a shale revolution that many of you have heard about that has really transform energy supply in the U.S. Energy that is reliable, affordable, and abundant, in fact, thanks to the innovation of our people. I would also say that Ohio has been a state that has led the nation in greenhouse gas reductions. It's no coincidence that the natural gas resource that's been proliferated in Ohio has had a big part of that. And we like for people to understand that we're not just about energy, but we are about taking care of the environment. I think where we sit today in our country needs more energy. Our world needs more energy. We are energy short. And the world needs more energy freedom. And we can call that security. And we're seeing that play out all across the world today. And we haven't even talked about much disadvantaged nations who don't have the energy that we have. It's been critical, and we can do something about it. Our industry's grown its production over 50% in the last 15 years. In the Appalachian Basin, it's kind of the natural gas equivalent to the Permian Basin that was mentioned before. We produce 35 BCF equivalent per day. That's 40% of the nation's natural gas supply. 15 years ago, the Appalachian Basin, in a little over 15 years ago, produced one BCF, 1 to 35 BCF. We can do more. We're the basin, as an example of the constraints that our industry is seeing, not to mention the negative tone from the top, but on a practical level, more pipeline infrastructure. And I'm talking about interstate pipelines that can move product from our basin to other states and other parts of the country that need it, and to also move it to export facilities to help our allies. You all have maybe heard about the examples of the New England states who are very short energy and natural gas and import natural gas and pay upwards of $30 per MMBTU, similar to what is going on in Europe. Whereas 200 miles south, there is abundant supply in Pennsylvania in the northeast Marcellus Shale that could more than deliver their needs and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Another project that has been held up, the one that I would mention most relevant to us today, is Mountain Valley Pipeline, MVP, taking gas from the Appalachian Basin to the southeast U.S. Today we are seeing constraints, infrastructure constraints, higher prices, higher demand for our product, but our inability to deliver that is causing higher prices. That project has been 8+ years in the making. It's 90% complete, and it's been held up in the courts and in the permitting process for a number of years. It's ready to go, and we can deliver. So I think our industry, it's an American industry. We've got the American work ethic. We can do more. We can solve problems. And I love the idea of let America build.
Thank you. It's so frustrating to see these solutions right there in front of us with all the impediments being imposed that really are blocking our ability to solve these problems. Next person we're going to go to is Lee Pilkonis, and with Associated General Contractors. She represents all the Bob the Builders across the country. Vice President and Counsel for AGC.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm here today representing the construction industry, Associated General Contractors of America, and the 27,000 member firms that employ hundreds of thousands of workers across the country who are building our quality of life. The construction industry needs to be part of any conversations around how we're going to meet our energy and climate goals. Contractors are key to any measures to make our economy more efficient, less carbon intensive, and more resilient. Our CEO, Stephen Sander, often says, "You can't wish for a greener future, you must build it." AGC has a climate change initiative. Our board of directors is having intense discussions on climate change developments and the implications on the construction industry. We're looking and exploring challenges as well as opportunities. We released a report that's available on our website, and that work has led us to establish 3 focused task forces that are drilling a little bit deeper. We're looking at climate technology and programs, material prices and supply chain issues, and also building safe and healthy communities. While construction firms are only a small contributor to the overall carbon emissions that are released each year, AGC is looking at opportunities for contractors to operate more efficiently, which could help the environment, also save our construction companies and the taxpayers money. And we're speaking about how contractors' expertise can help both public and private owners meet their energy and climate objectives. It's important to understand the contractor's role, which is direct control over means and methods only. Contractors generally do not decide what to build, where to build, how to build it, or how the projects will perform, or how they will appear. So innovative owners are really main market drivers here. The biggest impact will be on giving contractors a seat at the table and getting input early on what's being built as an effective way to really improve the process. We're very, and have been very encouraged by the streamlining reforms spearheaded by Congress over the last few years, but the administration's whole of government approach to climate has been leading to a very scattershot launch of new novel climate programs on greenhouse gas tracking, disclosures, buy clean procurement. At the same time, the agencies are rewriting the environmental rules that are understood and on the books related to waters of the U.S., Clean Water Act permitting, endangered species, migratory birds, social cost of carbon. So these will lead to more lengthy environmental reviews, more complex studies and analyses, more alternatives to consider, more speculation, which seems to really go against what Congress has been trying to do with speeding up environmental permitting and reviews without sacrificing environmental protections. What we really feel is that this endless flip-flopping of rules is creating a lot of instability. Others have talked about that. It affects reliance interests in commercial construction, and it makes it really difficult for general contractors to plan for future construction in terms of time, cost, quality, and just their overall risk management. So I look forward to answering any questions you have on this, or I'd love to share some of the suggestions that AGC has on how we can move forward. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and turn to Chad Zamarin. Chad, I heard Mr. Fisher note a minute ago how the pipeline access is a huge issue, and certainly I'm sure you have a perspective on that. You're Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy for the Williams Company.
I do, and Mr. Fisher is certainly my favorite customer in the room, so I'm glad to see him today. I am with the Williams Companies. We are one of the largest energy infrastructure companies in the country. I spoke this morning to a Senate committee, and I talked about the fact that I am of Ukrainian descent, that I'm only here today because my great-grandfather escaped Russian and Nazi persecution during the World Wars and came to America seeking freedom and security. And I can't tell you how proud I am to work for a company and work in an industry that provides energy security for us here at home. 15 years ago, we thought we were going to have to import natural gas into the United States because we thought we were running out of the resource. And in just under a decade, we were able to grow to what has become, we have become now the largest exporter of natural gas around the world. It is truly a national treasure, our energy infrastructure. It is unique around the world. We can produce energy cleaner and more efficiently than anywhere else. In distances far from where markets consume them, we can move energy over thousands of miles without losing it along the way. We can store it in vast quantities underground and dispatch it and deliver it to where and when it's needed. That is an energy equation that only exists in the United States. Frankly, it is the equation we want to try to solve when we talk about renewables. It can't be done today, but we can do it with our current infrastructure. We truly appreciate the efforts to streamline the permitting process. We would propose some very simple, we think you have the power to to address this issue with some very simple changes. We think for federally permitted projects, establishing one lead agency. That sounds like it makes sense, sounds obvious, but we have multiple agencies that have authority for permitting of federal projects. Establishing one lead agency with the final say in whether a project gets permitted. Establishing a timeline by which an agency has to issue a permit. If they don't meet that timeline, we should deem that permit issued. There are some very simple, we think, changes. We are not, and as Congressman Moore said, we are not asking for skirting the rules or circumventing the rules. If we understand the rules, we can build infrastructure efficiently. Today it takes, as you've heard, over 5 years to permit a project that we can most often build in under 12 months. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you here today and look forward to answering any questions that I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next stakeholder we have here today, Congressman Moore, with us is with the Utah DOT. Would you like to introduce?
Thank you, Member DeWango. This is Carlos Preston.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ranking Member Graves and members of the task force. My name is Carlos Berseras, and I'm the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Transportation. I've been with the department for over 36 years, the past 9+ years as Executive Director, the 12 previous years as Deputy Director, where I was responsible for all projects and operation and maintenance of the entire transportation system in Utah. Today, we have over 800 projects underway at DOT. And all those 800 projects are going through the review process, the permitting process that the committee has been talking about. But prior to my time at the Department of Transportation, my first degree was as a geologist, and I worked as a well site geologist in the oil and gas business, primarily in North Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana, over 40 years ago. And I really appreciate the comments about the uncertainty. The small consulting company that I worked for, we went out of business because of the variability and uncertainty associated with the business. And that's what forced me to go back to school, get an engineering degree, and start my service with the state of Utah. I think it's really important to understand that as Department of Transportation, we are not successful if we're not delivering what we call the community of our dreams for every city, every community in the state of Utah. And that includes building a great natural environment. So we like to think that we improve the environment when we come in and do projects. We improve the human environment, but we also want to build that world-class transportation system that really the public depends on. I appreciate the task force allowing me to participate virtually. I wish I could be there with you. I'm with a team of fellow CEO, directors of transportation, and we're over in London experiencing their little heat wave that they're having here right now. So I appreciate that. But I've learned over the years that the work we do to provide the infrastructure for this country, whether it be transportation or energy, is really critical, supporting our nation's security, our economic well-being, and the quality of life for all of our citizens. And when it works, really the public doesn't notice. And sometimes it's hard to be in a business where the public doesn't notice, and your goal is to not be noticed. It's when it doesn't work that the citizens really notice us, and that's when we have to be accountable. And when we have to be accountable for not getting our products to market, getting our projects, because every project we do is there to save lives and make people's lives better. The faster we can do that, the better we can make people's lives. And so our goals are to make a great city, a great environment, and not bypass any environmental processes. But we actually have to have partners to do that. We need to have partners in the federal government. We have great partners with the private sector. I can't speak highly enough of the most amazing contractors. I think that in the country, in the state of Utah, incredibly innovative, and our consultants who help support us are amazing as well. So we have that public-private partnership working really well. We just need our partners at the federal government to be aligned with the goals that we have at the state level to help support us in achieving those goals that we have. And I know they're all committed to what they feel is doing the right thing and really following those laws that are in place. But it's really looking at a higher level of what we're trying to achieve and to make happen. Now, the state of Utah has the most amazing resource. Our northeast part of our state, the Uinta Basin, has tremendous quality of oil and gas. And today we're trucking that over 100 miles of a 2-lane road to the refineries in Salt Lake City. Those refineries are running at capacity. We would love to be able to open that oil up to the market and be able to get that oil to other refineries. And for that, we need more infrastructure investment, and we need good partners to help us make that happen. Now, I'm really proud in Utah, the way we do things. We like to say that our secret sauce is that we work well together, we collaborate, and help support each other in getting things done. It's not that hard to do, but sometimes when we try to trip over those rules and regulations, it keeps us from getting there. So I thank you for the leadership that this task force is taking to help really look out for the well-being of our country, and I really look forward to being able to help in any way I can. So thank you for allowing me to participate. Thank
you, Director Berseras. We appreciate you being here with us. Last, we have the Administrator of the Idaho Office of Energy and Mineral Resources, Mr. Richard Stover.
Thank you, Ranking Member Graves and members of the task force. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you. As Representative Graves mentioned, I am the administrator of the Idaho Office of Energy and Mineral Resources. As it relates to today's discussion, the roles of my office is to develop policy and coordinate planning for Idaho's energy and mineral needs, and also to cooperate, to act as the cooperating agency on federal projects and rulemaking issues as those affect the state of Idaho. As it relates to that, I can tell you my background. I'm fairly recently appointed, having only been here for about 6 weeks. Prior to that time, I'm an attorney by trade, was in private practice for about 17 years. And so that experience touches on some of the things that some of the other members of the task force and the guests today talked about, in particular the uncertainty. When I was in private practice and was litigating, we had doctrines in terms of proving damages with reasonable certainty. What I'm experiencing in my short time here at OMER is permittees and applicants are dealing with this uncertainty, and opportunists are oftentimes using this as an opportunity to advance litigation. And I'm seeing that just after 6 weeks here. So what I can tell you is that efforts to streamline and shore up the permitting process would be welcome here in Idaho. In terms of what we're doing here in Idaho, Idaho is already ranked very low in terms of emission. We're the third lowest emitting state in terms of energy. However, with the deadlines, whether they are arbitrary or market driven, we're finding a lot of energy applicants coming in here. And the issue for Idaho is that we're 63% federal land. So virtually every energy development or transmission building program, infrastructure program, touches on federal land and therefore implicates NEPA. And what we're finding is that with these sometimes arbitrary deadlines and the delays in getting the permits approved, it's becoming extremely difficult to navigate that. And my office is, in its capacity as the coordinating agency, we're oftentimes stuck in the middle of state agencies, federal agencies, and the private entities that are trying to meet these deadlines. And so we appreciate your effort to the extent that you can help streamline these processes, make it easier for these new developments to come online. We really appreciate that.
Thank you for those comments. I see Ranking Member Graves is back in the room now. For the question and answer period.
All right. Again, I want to thank the stakeholders. Congressman Dusty Johnson from South Dakota is here and representing a state that has an extraordinary amount of energy production and certainly some
more North Dakota.
Some perspective here. Well, we usually refer to it as East and West, but in any case, Dusty.
Yeah, we don't have all the good oil that North Dakota has, but we've got plenty of energy production of different kinds. I guess my question for the panel, and I'll back up. I spent 6 years as a utility regulator, a state utilities regulator, environmental and economic regulator. And it was amazing how often our siting of large projects was held up by the federal government. I mean, time after time after time. We could complete our work in a year. It took 5 or 6 years for the federal government to complete theirs. And then after that, I went into an engineering firm whereby we built projects across the country, broadband projects. And it would routinely be the case that a project that could have gotten done in a year ended up taking longer than that. And in fact, our estimates were federal regulations added 30% to the price of the projects. So I guess my question to those of you who are builders, I mean, what are some of the best practices when we look at countries or at states that really do a good job? What sets them apart? And I would just note, because GE and others are big multinationals, so they may have some good international perspective. I mean, the same project that takes 2 years to site in France or Germany takes 7 years to site in America. That is a tragic data point. And that kind of regulatory burden imposes a serious, chronic, and expensive drag on the American economy. And so how can we do it better?
Yeah, I can certainly start. I mean, we build a lot of pipeline projects, federal and both at the state level. And I can tell you that at the federal project level, we've seen both the courts and the regulatory framework become politicized. And that when that wasn't the case, we could build federally mandated projects, federally approved projects very efficiently. And so the types of legislative fixes that we would propose would clarify the permitting agency's authority. Today, we've seen state and federal agencies exercise authority that we don't believe they were intended to have. We don't truly have a single federal permitting agency. In our case, it would be the FERC. The FERC has to account. We believe all those other permitting agencies should have input, but the FERC should make the final say. And when they do, and your permit is issued, you should be empowered to build your project. And when it comes to the courts, we believe that you can improve the legislative standard for the appellate courts to make sure that if we have evidence in support of our projects, that a project cannot be denied, and we can take that through the appellate process. Some relatively simple fixes, but they weren't needed when we didn't see the political kind of maneuvering within the regulatory and legislative areas. But the places where that works well, states like Texas, where we have a large footprint, Louisiana, we're able to build infrastructure because those issues don't exist at those local levels.
So one quick follow-up before we, because I think Leo wants to get in too. So I think the standard right now, and I forget the name of the case, but indicates that courts are supposed to provide deference to administrative agencies that act as an ALJ. If due deference is not the right standard, what is?
So we've actually, we would approve, we would propose language that if a permit were to be contested, that the appellate standard to approve permits is approved unless the record lacks credible support. That is a different standard than what exists today. I think that's a fair standard. We have to have credible support for our projects, and if we do, you can't get stuck in the court system for years and years and years. And so we have some language that we would propose would fix this issue that we don't think was intended to be a problem.
Thanks.
And then, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, I was just going to say, kind of building off of what Chad said, I mean, we have become a very litigious society, and I think that that because of that, there is this effort to just overdo everything, to make the documentation, the studies, the research, the looking at the alternatives, it's excessive. It's become excessive. We have a huge amount of duplication in our efforts. One federal decision, and you talked about having there be a quarterback agency. There needs to be somebody running the show as the quarterback. We're so fragmented. We have so many different resource agencies coming into the mix between EPA, the Corps, Fish and Wildlife, the tribes, the National Historic Preservation. There are so many different agencies that to get everybody on the same page, we have a lot of do-overs. So in NEPA, we've seen situations where there's a whole lot of studies going on, a whole lot of information that's being collected, excessive reporting happening, and then you're not even through the permit process yet. So it's a do-over then where you're getting a lot of the same studies and information again when you need to get your clean water permits, when you need to do your endangered species consults, when you need to get your historic preservation sign-off. So, I mean, we've suggested that doing things concurrently is so critically important, but I also think what is critically important is transparency and accountability. We have seen that projects that are going through that Fast 41 dashboard, where you're actually posting timelines and deadlines, you're posting when documents are completed, it's making agencies more accountable. There are also things that I know Congress has passed to require agencies that aren't meeting those deadlines to say why. And so I think those are some things that that would be helpful in moving things forward.
Thanks.
Thank you. In addition to South Dakota being a top ethanol producer, Mr. Feenstra from Iowa represents another state with an extraordinary amount of corn production.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you,
Oh,
Ranking
and
Member
by the way, I
Graves.
meant to say thank you for your leadership, Garrett, because honestly, this has been an incredible process.
I echo that. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for each one of the members on the panel. The information that you gave today is invaluable. And I want to echo also what Congressman Johnson said. You know, we all want sustainability. You need sustainability as you move out in the future. My district in Iowa, we're the #1 in wind energy in the country. We're also #1 in ethanol and biodiesel. So I have a different area of energy than maybe some of you have. The question I have, being in the state Senate in Iowa and now at the federal level, is it seems like, and you talked about this, Leah, and so did you, Chad, about the duplicate process that's happening from the FERC to our IU Utilities Board, then you have that in every state. You have some utilities board. How can we, #1, communicate together that we're not duplicating these things from the state level to the federal level and not having the state stop something the federal is approving or vice versa? And then I see the big thing around eminent domain, whether you're creating some transmission line or some transmission pipeline. It seems like society has dramatically changed from the 40s when we were doing all our roads and electricity and all this other stuff, that it's really a hard time trying to get some transmission going because of eminent domain. Any ideas or thoughts that you have on those two issues? And I'll open it up to any of you.
I think that getting more states authorized to administer the NEPA process, that's something that we strongly support. Also, you know, if you've got a project that is going through, if the project's federally funded on federal lands, has a federal permit where you're going to be going through the NEPA process, I think that the information that's being collected, the studies, the documentation, the research that's being done should be used to satisfy the permitting process. There shouldn't, as I said, be a do-over. I think that I'll stop there. Chad, do you have something?
I would just say that we used to be able to permit a federal project in under a year. And we have not significantly changed the permitting process, but FERC has allowed, and they have seen attacks from states and other agencies that have been politicized that have made that process much harder. And so we can permit projects faster. If in legislation you were to mandate a timeline by which a permit needed to be issued and hold it hard and fast, and you were to grant authority that FERC shall consult with those other agencies, but has the final determination on issuing the permit, that would bring this process to order. Right now, this process it is not the way it was intended. I mean, the Natural Gas Act was intended to build efficiently energy infrastructure in our country, and loopholes are being found that subvert that process. You mentioned eminent domain. It actually works fairly well once you get through the gauntlet on natural gas pipeline projects. It's going to be a major issue for electric transmission in our country. I mean, it is very hard to build national energy infrastructure that we know is for the good of the country, but when you have to go through someone's backyard, it is hard. We understand that. We want to work with landowners and do it the right way, but we also recognize that there are projects that are meant to serve the greater good, and you have to have that authority. So I would say on the pipeline infrastructure side, if we can get through that process, it works fairly well, but we've got to get through that process, and that's really where our pain is being felt. Thank you.
Mr. Ranking Member, if I could?
Please.
Carlos. Yes, thank you. I want to, Utah's one of the few states that have taken up what the tool that Congress gave to be a NEPA assignment state. So that means we make the decisions with the NEPA document. And the reason we did that was because there's not as much motivation for a federal employee who's not even usually a resident of the state to take the risk to make those types of decisions. Now, we realize sometimes we're not going to maybe do as well as we could, but we have to step forward and make a decision, learn from that, and move forward. And so as much as you can, it has helped accelerate the NEPA process. As much as you can, look at other processes to allow states, if they choose, to take on the assignment process to be able to do that. Now, the other, the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act are all other hurdles that we have to go through as we go through to try to get projects done. So as much as Congress can do to look at giving states the flexibility and the ability to choose to take on some of those processes themselves, it doesn't hurt the environment. I believe it actually makes better decisions, and they happen much faster.
Thank you. Others? Burgess, do you have questions?
I really appreciate Chad bringing up my first term on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We passed the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and the whole purpose in doing that was the country was running out of natural gas, and we were having to import it from the North Sea up somewhere in Boston. And Ed Markey would rail against the fact that this Norwegian princess was going to blow up in the Boston Harbor, take out the Fall River School, and we were going to be the greatest mass murderer since Adolf Hitler. And that bothered me at the time. But now we're at a point where you're I think Jeff brought up, you're producing a lot of, in the Appalachian Basin. Obviously, we produce a lot in Texas, but we can't get it to Boston because we lack the infrastructure to be able, the permitting to be able to get the infrastructure to go up there. And then I guess because of the Jones Act or some darn thing, we can't even ship it from Freeport, Texas into the port of Boston. So it comes in from Russia. And you've got the same thing. The Norwegian princess, basically the Russian equivalent of the Norwegian princess, sitting in the Boston Harbor. The same damn thing could blow up and the Fall River School is still there. So, I mean, what problem have you solved after 20 years? Well, zero, except that we're buying gas from Russia right now, and we shouldn't be doing that. It's not like we ran out here. We've got it, and we just need to be able to build the infrastructure to get it where it needs to go. That's the purpose of the bill that again, the task force was kind enough to kind of take up as part. We just can't talk about this stuff enough. And the point that Garrett always makes, Ranking Member Graves always makes, is that we do it better here than anywhere else in the world. And if you're worried about the environmental effects, then don't be buying gas from Russia. There's lots of other reasons not to do it, but the environmental impact is probably the main one. We do it better in the Appalachian Basin, the Permian Basin, than anywhere else in the world. We've got the experts here in this country.
I would just add to that, and on Chad's point, I think it's a great point. Clarity in who has the ball, who has the authority, streamlining that process. But as part of that, somebody that's looking at the big picture and the overall strategy. I know that's kind of the holy grail that's been talked about forever, is a national strategy on energy. But I think there is a need for more leadership. I think some of these specific issues that are talked about between federal and state can somewhat go away if there's strong leadership and a goal in mind. And obviously, I think that would help bring clarity to some of the politics that have come into the equation.
Thank you. Please.
I was just going to add, and to your point, Congressman, just last fourth quarter of last year, emissions in New England increased because we had to burn oil because we didn't have sufficient natural gas supplies. We had a project to build in New England that we spent almost $1 billion and had to cancel the project because we couldn't complete it. We had a project to build into New York City that was going to displace home heating oil primarily in low-income housing. The low-income housing community wanted the project. It was stopped solely, it was $1 billion project, thousands of jobs, tax revenues for the state. It was stopped solely for political reasons. And so that's why when we have federally permitted projects, we think we've got to strengthen that authority to take that ability to stop those projects out of the way.
Thanks. One, I think a lot of people look at what's happening in the country today in regard to climate change policies being at the forefront, and a lot of people are probably believing that we're actually on this trajectory of reduced emissions. But when you go back and look, what you just noted, we've actually seen not just higher prices, not just less energy security, but actually higher emissions. Emissions have actually gone up. Last year, they went up 6.3%. So you're failing on affordability, you're failing on the environment, and certainly failing on security as well. You brought up the just pipeline issues. In fact, both of you did, in regard to being able to transport energy through pipelines and how we have seen NEPA block permit pipelines. We've seen the 401 process, Clean Water Act certification block pipelines. Congressman Burgess just brought it up as well. Could you just talk a little bit about transporting energy through a pipeline versus other transportation mechanisms in terms of emissions, cleanliness, things along those lines?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. I serve on the Department of Transportation. I was appointed by the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary LaHood back in the day, and I still serve on PHMSA's advisory committee, Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee. Pipelines are by far the safest form of transportation. In fact, displacing home heating oil in New York City would have taken heating trucks off the road and would have allowed us to deliver natural gas, cleaner natural gas through pipeline. So it is by far the safest mode of transportation for energy that we can deliver. We also understand that methane emissions are an issue that have to be addressed, and we are aggressively focused on decarbonizing the natural gas value chain. We also think that 45Q, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, that we have further opportunities. In the great state of Louisiana, we just announced a project where we're going to take gas from the Haynesville, we're going to move it to the Gulf Coast, we're going to put it into LNG terminals, and alongside that, we're going to build CCUS infrastructure, and we're going to decarbonize the existing energy infrastructure if we can get the help out of the way. I mean, we have the ability to do that today.
And we've seen so many examples in history where when government was simply agnostic in terms of the energy technology and just said, hey, we want clean sources, industry was able to come in and innovate and able to exceed environmental goals, meaning lower emissions than was even projected, and of course, greater affordability of energy. And so to see this now effectively ban on new oil and gas production in the United States, what's happening is exactly what we expected. It's what's happened historically is you've seen emissions go up, dependence upon foreign energy sources, which is dirtier than in the United States. I wanted to ask you all, I mentioned at the opening that the only thing that triggers environmental permits and National Environmental Policy Act and things like that are when you're using federal dollars, you trigger a federal permit, or you impact federal resources. And so the reality is the majority of projects carried out across America today don't have to go through all these hoops because they're funded with state, local, or private dollars. Based on y'all's experience, and I know a few of you have noted how we should give states more authority to carry out the regulatory process, but have you seen examples where relying upon a state process or a local process rather than the federal regulatory, you've seen a detriment or an adverse impact on the environment, or do you believe that communities generally want to see a sustainable, healthy environment? Anybody want to reflect on that or perhaps give examples?
Well, I think absolutely states are keenly aligned with us, not only for the energy supply, but also for the environmental impacts. And they've established rules and regulations that we work hand in hand on, and it's created results. I think I mentioned that greenhouse gas reduction in the state of Ohio is leading in the nation, and there's a lot of great policies and a lot of great technology and innovation that have occurred to improve environmental impacts. So off the top of my head, I can't think of any right now that would suggest that the states are blocking what we're trying to help the U.S. do.
And I would just say there are some states that clearly have stopped projects, but I think Louisiana is a great example. One of the challenges we have is we can build intrastate and gathering infrastructure very efficiently, but the network that we're blessed with in the United States is important to remember, and you don't want to build into a cul-de-sac. You know, a great example is, I mean, we can unleash U.S. LNG, and we talk about it being the greatest green initiative on the planet. If we can increase LNG deliveries around the world, it will displace foreign coal, and it will have the most significant impact in reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, bar none. It would be equivalent, if we quadrupled LNG exports, equivalent to electrifying every vehicle, equivalent to putting solar panels on every house, and quadrupling the wind power generation that exists today in the United States. I mean, we can do this, but if we, and a great example, Louisiana will support the development of the resource, but we're going to build right into a cul-de-sac if we can't approve interstate pipelines and LNG export facilities to move that product to market.
Thank you. A quick note, I remember seeing very early on in this administration when they decided they were going to block the Keystone Pipeline, they cited greenhouse gases as being one of the justification, a justification for rejecting it. Only months later to see Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, standing in front of that microphone saying, oh no, the energy production that occurred as a result of, or in the Keystone vicinity, it's still happening. They're just transporting the energy through other mechanisms, which of course means greater chance for spill, greater emissions. Just fascinating that their whole effort to save the environment's resulting in the opposite. I'm curious, either of our state agencies that are here, do either of you have any reflection on y'all's regulations or your procedures to ensure environmental protection whenever federal resources aren't triggered?
Yes, ranking member. So like I said, we do NEPA assignments. So we're the decision makers on NEPA documents. And even though over 80% of our transportation funding is state funding, and the federal money is, we usually put it on the simplest, least controversial type of projects so that we can keep things as streamlined as possible. In fact, we trade out some of our federal dollars, the federal dollars of our local government, so that they can have an easier job to administer it. But we follow the same federal regulations and really set a higher standard for ourselves, because again, I fail if I hurt the environment. I am very close to the public. They are, you know, what I live in these towns. And so I want to make sure that our environment does really great. And so we will not do something that is wrong for our cities, for our environment. We just will not do that. And I think the accountability is closer to the people when the states are allowed to make these decisions.
That's a great point. And Director, I'm also curious about do you have any comparison of timeline or cost in terms of compliance? We do. We can, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but we have been able to move EISs, environmental assessments, and categorical exclusions forward faster because we're willing to actually make a decision. There's very little reward for, I'll say, a federal employee sometimes to take the risk to make a decision because they may be sued for that decision. We've taken on the responsibility. If we do something wrong and we get challenged, we get sued. And so we're willing to step forward and deliver on those projects. To give you an example, when the local governments come to us and say they have federal money, can you exchange that for state money? They exchange that on 85 cents on the dollar. They feel that they can save money and deliver the projects faster and get less money for that just because of that exchange of state money for federal money. I think that's a pretty clear example of how the local governments are seeing, the burdens placed on them through the federal process. Mr. Stover, anything to add?
Well, thank you. Not act as the NEPA agency here in Idaho, but to the extent that we have assumed certain controls of regulatory processes, whether they're at the federal level or the state permitting level, what I can tell you is that Idaho is quite efficient in those, and we operate much more quickly. And like my counterpart in Utah said, we're operating close to the ground here, close to the people. When it comes to mining, for example, the permitting process here, once they're approved at the federal level, the plants that are close by are often on state or private land. And those employees live there, they're raising their kids there, and once we go through the permitting process for siting those, we keep in mind that those people are going to be the taxpayers, they're educating their kids there. And I can tell you, every one of those employees that I have spoken to, they all take their responsibility to care for the environment quite seriously because their livelihood depends on it. So We do not take the lead role like Utah does, but to the extent that we have done permitting here in the state of Idaho, we're quite efficient and we work with our people at the local level to make it successful.
Thank you. Please.
For the construction industry, we've looked closely and identified the Section 404 Clean Water Act permit as being the permit, especially if you're getting an individual permit for a lot of these important projects that we're talking about, is a permit that takes the longest. You add, if you're talking 5 to 7 years for NEPA, it could be, another 2 years to get through that permitting process. And I think that is an example where when we've got this pendulum swinging and this flip-flop between the federal government taking control and EPA and the Corps trying to permit, dry ditches or isolated wetlands, things that are within state borders, that states would be better suited to have protections in place for those waters. We're not talking about not protecting the waters, we're talking about pushing a lot of projects through a long, lengthy federal permitting process when they really don't need to be going through that process to be protected. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, so put a face on the craziness we're talking about today. Again, I'm from South Louisiana, where we spend a lot of time and money doing coastal wetlands restoration. We've had projects where, I want to reiterate, we're restoring wetlands that eroded, that were just there. We've been told that we have to mitigate for essential fish habitat because it is open water, because the wetlands eroded, so now it's open water. And they're saying if we restore the wetlands, we have to mitigate for taking fish habitat away, which I asked the question, well, did the fish mitigate when they took the human habitat away? I didn't get an answer, but in any case, these are projects that are solely designed to benefit the environment, to benefit ecological productivity. I'm curious, Mr. Martella, do you believe that, with all the innovation that GE is working on, do you believe that we should have a process that maybe reflects the threat to the environment? Meaning if we're looking at renewable energy technologies or a project that's designed to benefit the environment, that we have an expedited process?
Thank you, Ranking Member. And everything you're talking about, all these themes apply just as much to the clean energy projects we work on as anything else. And I was explaining to some of the folks ahead of time, I actually lose more sleep these days on getting some of our renewable energy projects through than some other things to put things in perspective. And I think your question goes to a great question Congressman Johnson raised too, which I've been thinking about. He said, you're a multinational company. What are other countries doing better that we're not doing? And I think it's a great point. I think there's two things I would say that addresses your question too. And this one kind of surprised me as I traveled around the world is other countries have this culture that once they decide they're going to do something, they do it. And there may be bumps in the road, they're going to take public participation, they're going to make some adjustments, but no one ever questions the fact the government said we're going to do it, so we're going to do it. And you have that certainty. When the government here approves something, that's just the beginning. Then you have the litigation and things like that, and you're entering a new phase of uncertainty. So I think one thing we could do is for projects that we care about, be more definitive, more committed. We're going to have public participation. We're going to welcome that in. We're going to make adjustments. We're going to consider it. We're going to set timelines. We're going to set limits. That 2 years from now, this is going to happen. We'll make some adjustments and accommodations, but it's going to happen. That's one thing I think we see in other places of the world. There's a sense of certainty. And the second, and Leah was talking about this too, is we have this gotcha culture that we're always looking for the gotchas, and that's what stops these major projects from going through. Other governments weigh the risks, they focus on where the impacts are. It's not kind of the treasure trove of everything that could possibly happen. It's what are the real risks, how do we focus on those, direct our energy on that. They may look at those broader issues, kind of pre-assess those at the beginning, but then for a specific project, and then focus, what are the localized risks, the localized issues, what are the things that are different about this, and let's put our energy there. Again, I think that's an area where this task force and other parts of the government can help to kind of encourage that pre-work so that when the project comes through, the pipeline or whatever it is, the clean energy project, you're really limiting your focus to those unique impacts of that project. I think those are two of the reasons that we see more success in other places, both in terms of conventional energy projects and renewable energy, in moving through with a lot more certainty.
You're telling me that you don't think Vladimir Putin or China have the same NEPA process?
Public participation may not be quite at the same level.
Thank you. I'm curious, Mr. Gillespie, do you have any response to that last question about if we should sort of calibrate the environmental review or the bureaucracy to the potential threat that the project truly poses, and perhaps even the prioritization, as Mr. Martella noted.
Yeah, so, I think the point on a national policy, a national will is what I heard. And, this country's never had a real energy policy. We've just said we're going to do that was aligned by, with broad agreement across, all sectors of the nation. If I look, national policy, this notion of rule clarity, and then something that either through legislation that assigns a notion that once a permit is issued, that process basically deemed that the project is safe. And now if there is legal intervention by the courts, the onus should be on the courts to prove that it's unsafe, as opposed to stopping a project and the project having to prove once again that it's safe, beneficial, and good for the public. I think right now that the accountability is almost twofold on the builder, in that we have to get it permitted. We prove that the project is safe and beneficial, and then it gets challenged in the courts, and once again, over and over again, we're vulnerable to having to prove that beneficiality all over.
It's a great point, and just completely inefficient. I think back to our founders, or some of the early Westerners that were developing these areas, and what they were doing and going through in order to just establish these developments, and what we're doing to ourselves now. It's incredible. Mr. Fisher, I want to ask you a question. If you look at what's happening with energy policy in the United States today, where you're seeing the United States literally turning to other countries that have worse environmental records, that have greater emissions, have less safety than the United States does, knowing that we have these resources, as was noted earlier, right under our own feet. How does that make you feel, watching the United States turn to other countries with, again, worse environmental and safety records to power this nation's economy, when we have the resources here and you're being told no?
Yeah, I mean, many in our industry are offended by that. I think naturally, we feel like we have developed tremendous resource. We think we do it as good as anybody in the world, and we have more that we can offer. So we're sitting in a constrained situation. We've got to do things in a disciplined manner, and certainly in an environmentally responsible manner, but we've made a lot of progress, and we've proven that our industry can be part of the solution. And the facts are that 80% of the world's energy is still provided by fossil fuels, and they create tremendous benefit for everybody in the world. And so I think from our perspective, not only do we need to take care of energy supply in the U.S., shore some things up, get our product to where it's needed most within our country, but there's so much more that we can do beyond that. And a world impact, the scale of the benefits of this are literally worldwide, and we're missing that opportunity.
Thank you. Do you have anything? I want to thank all of you for being here and participating today, and thanks those of you that are online. This next component that we're releasing today of our Energy, Climate, and Conservation Task Force is Let America Build. And I made the comment earlier that, can you imagine if before we invaded for D-Day, that we went and did a NEPA analysis, or issued a 404 permit, or got 401 certification, or some other section bureaucracy that's out there. I mean, we'd never get anything done. And this is holding back America. It's preventing us from being able to achieve, once again, energy independence, energy security. It's preventing us from being able to implement projects, whether they're traffic solutions, they're resilience solutions, even environmental resiliency or productivity solutions. They're all being hampered. Our renewable energy projects, modernization of the grid, all of these things that certainly shouldn't be fights, they're all being hampered. Just today, we had Secretary Buttigieg in the Transportation Committee. One federal decision that we were talking about earlier, having one decision maker to coordinate the various agencies, that was in the law. Yet, when the Federal Highway Administration released their documents, they made no reference, nothing whatsoever about what was in the law, requiring one federal decision, trying to streamline. And I'll say it again, when you look at worker shortages, when you look at supply chain problems, inflation, energy unaffordability, all of this contributes, the regulatory bureaucracy contributes to cost and delays solutions that Americans are really begging for out there right now across the country. And so really excited about some of the solutions that we're going to be aggressively pushing forward. I want to thank you all again, and I hope that this is a continued discussion and dialogue. We want to make sure that those of you on the ground trying to be the innovators and trying to implement the solutions that our policies actually help to facilitate and strike that right balance between economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and other objectives that are so important in our communities across the country. So thank you.